Thank you for joining us for our Tuesday Travel Talk series Spotlight on Australia and New Zealand. While you're getting ready, if you want to put in the chat box your name and where you're joining us from, we'd love to hear from you. Hi, Barbara from Nashville. We've got Judy joining us from Virginia. Hi, John in Pennsylvania. Ellen and Stephen in Delaware. All right, we have Carol from Canada. Hello, Canada. We've got Judy from Texas. Hope everyone is doing well in Texas. Been hearing some tough things about the weather there, so hope you and yours are doing well. Got Ken and Nori from California. Welcome. Oh, Charles and Esther in Arizona. Thank you for joining us. Linda and Paul from Plymouth, Massachusetts. Wonderful. I'm in Massachusetts as well. Hello from Germany. Wow, welcome. Got Michelle from Michigan. Elaine from Ohio. Thank you for joining us. Hello to the folks who are joining us on Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us. We're happy to have you with us. We've got Dominic from Planet Earth. Me too. Melanie from Minnesota. Hello. Hi, Judith in Iowa. Hope you're doing well today. Thank you for joining us. We've got Liz from Canada. Linda and Brad in Minnesota. Wow, we've got a lot of folks here with us today. Thanks for coming. Janet, welcome. Thanks for joining us from Indiana. Fran, thanks for coming. Kathy coming from West Virginia. Welcome, Kathy. Thanks for joining us. Pat and Greg from Virginia. Thanks for coming. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us for our Travel Talk Tuesday Spotlight on Australia and New Zealand. Now, before we get started, I do want to cover some housekeeping items. We are going to be joined today by 3 of our top tour directors from Australia and New Zealand to talk about one of our itineraries there that is one of our absolute favorites from the Go Ahead catalog. Now, if this is your first webinar with us, you should know that in these webinars, we can't see or hear you. You will just be able to see me, your host, as well as the 3 tour directors that will be joining us. But we do want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. So if you do have questions, please put them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And we will try to get to as many of them as possible during the session and at the end during the question and answer section. We also asked for questions from you before the tour or before the webinar began, and we'll be working some of those in as well. Now, we did get a number of them that were about folks' specific reservations to Australia and New Zealand, especially as it relates to COVID-19. And I should say that, we're very excited to get going again, and we know you are too. And we are monitoring the situation and are hopeful, but there are still some restrictions in place. If you did ask one of these questions, a member of our team will be reaching out to you individually in the coming days to talk to you about your specific situation and answer all of your questions. But also, I should say that we now have tour dates available through the end of 2023, so it's not too early to start planning. So if this webinar gets your gears going and you start dreaming about traveling to Australia, New Zealand, it's not too early for you to start planning. Now, let's dive in and talk about these 2 incredible countries. Now, for world travelers, Australia and New Zealand have a reputation that precedes them. For many of us, the fascination starts with learning about the native creatures and the natural majesty of these places. From afar, we've come to love koalas and kangaroos, among many others. We also are often awed by the diversity and the size of the Great Barrier Reef and the reef's importance to our world and our ecosystem. Many travelers will also be looking forward to the incredible landscapes of New Zealand and the soaring peaks and fjords that you find there. Our travelers will also be familiar with the world-class cities that you will see on this tour and some of the landmarks like the Sydney Opera House. There are so many reasons to add Australia and New Zealand to your bucket list, but perhaps the best reason is the folks you'll meet there and the friendships you'll make along the way. At Go Ahead, our mission is opening the world through education. We believe that the best way to learn about the world is to experience it, and we want to help as many people as possible to do just that. We make travel accessible by taking care of the details for you. So we take care of the hotels and meals, on-tour transportation, local guides, and of course, one of the things that really sets Go Ahead apart is our tour directors. Now, if you've never been on a Go Ahead tour before, let me tell you that our tour directors really are what take your tour to the next level. Not only are they there to help you with all the logistics of hotels and meals, but they're also there to be storytellers and historians and connect you with the places and people that you are visiting. Now, today we are very lucky. We have three of the top tour directors that we have in Australia and New Zealand joining us today. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell us how long they've been leading tours with Go Ahead. First, I'm going to ask Luke to say hello and tell us how long he's been with us. Luke, would you tell the people, would you say hello and tell the folks how long you've been working for us?
Well, thank you, Nelson. It's good to see you, and thank you for the invite today. My name is Luke. I'm joining you from my home in Melbourne, Australia. I've been with the company for 18 years now, taking groups around Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. My passion is traveling, and I look forward to sharing some of that with you today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Luke. Next, we have Sladana. Now, Sladana, please say hello, introduce yourself, and tell the folks how long you've been leading tours with Go Ahead.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm coming to you from Sydney, which is my hometown, and I've had the absolute privilege of being a part of the Go Ahead family for 14 years. So I love showcasing the South Pacific to our travellers, and when I'm not tour directing, then I'm much like them, love travelling and exploring the world. So very excited to share some of our gems and surprise and delight you for this part of the world.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Brad, the same question for you. If you could say hello and tell us how long you've been leading tours with Go Ahead. Brad, oh, it looks like we may have lost Brad for the time being, but when he comes back on, we will be asking him some questions and we'll be asking him for his input on some of the portions of this tour. But for the time being, let's move on to the itinerary that we're going to be discussing today. Now, the itinerary that we chose for today is called Australia and New Zealand. And it's called that because it has it all. We cover as much ground as we possibly can and show you everything that you want to see in these two amazing countries. Now, from Australia's Great Barrier Reef and the rugged outback to New Zealand's sheep-dotted plains and cliff-lined fjords, the South Pacific features a lineup of dramatic landscapes, outdoor adventures, and sophisticated multicultural cities. During the Australian portion of this itinerary, you'll experience Melbourne and Sydney, the outback, and the Great Barrier Reef. You'll then take in the awe-inspiring beauty of New Zealand and come to meet the wonderful people that call that place home. Now, Sladana, I'm going to actually ask you to hop in here, and we're going to talk about Melbourne and Sydney. Now, I imagine that most of our travelers have heard of these two cities, although they might be a little bit more familiar with Sydney. But let's start with Melbourne, as the tour does. Now, can you tell me a little bit about Melbourne, what we'll see there, and then I'm going to ask you to contrast that with a type of experience that our folks will have in Sydney.
Absolutely. I love that these two cities, our largest cities in Australia, bookend our time down under. You know, we start in Melbourne, and Melbourne is such a culturally diverse city. It is the second largest city, and there is a real healthy rivalry between Melbourne and Sydney, a bit like what you will experience between your East Coast and West Coast. And I think what's really special about Melbourne is that people don't have that many expectations of what they're going to see, so it's all a delightful surprise. This building here is the famous Flinders Street Station, and it is as iconic to Melburnians as what the Opera House is to Sydney-siders. A distinct feature of Melbourne is the tram. So you've got the streetcar there. They're fabulous because they're free within the central business district. Our visitors, our hotels are very close to downtown, and you know, you can hop on these trams and they really create the hum of the city. And I always encourage our passengers to really get on one of those and just to get a sense of what it's like to be a Melburnian. It's one of the largest tram networks in the world. Melbourne, unlike Sydney, was actually a planned city, so it's really easy to navigate. And what makes it so beautiful is that it's situated along the Yarra River. So South Bank Boulevard down there is very close to our hotel, and just along that stretch, you will see the diversity of cultures. They say that there isn't a language spoken in the world that you can't hear in Melbourne, and that is reflected in its food culture as well. Everything from the different restaurants, whether it's Little Italy or you know, Greek town or Chinatown, fabulous restaurants. It is regarded as the food capital. So Melbourne is one of those places where you've got to enjoy your coffee and different cuisines. It's also known as the cultural capital. So lots of theatre. And at this time of year, if we've got any Australian Open fans or tennis fans right now, you know, the first of the Grand Slams is happening in Melbourne as we speak. And something that our travellers get surprised by is how accessible these stadiums are from where we are. We actually drive past a number of the Olympic Park. We go past the Melbourne Cricket Ground, which is the 10th largest stadium in the world. Aussies and Melburnians are sports fanatics, and the proximity of that you can actually walk from the city centre, from downtown to these events. So it really is part of the hub of the city to see such a large city and then to see all these sporting arenas in such close proximity. This is one of my absolute favourite highlights of our time in Melbourne, and this is actually an aerial view of the Royal Botanical Gardens, and that really imposing structure in the middle is the Shrine of Remembrance, and we like to take a stop there on our city sites. Melbourne has so many gardens surrounding it, so lots of green and open spaces. And the shrine there was built as a shrine following World War I, and it's a beautiful place to come for contemplation on our sightseeing tour. Now, it would not be complete to visit Melbourne and not visit the Queen Victoria markets. It's one of these little gems. They are the largest open air markets in the Southern Hemisphere, and your taste buds get tantalised. So you've got so many different delis. You've got the fishmongers and the butchers, and they're all vying for your attention. And one of my recommendations is to get a few little samples of some goodies that you want to try, some delicacies, take it down to South Bank Boulevard, sit by the river, enjoy an outdoor picnic, and just watch the world go by. So something very special to do in Melbourne.
Sladana, I have to tell you, I love the sound of any city that's described as the food capital. Wonderful. Well, that's a really great overview of Melbourne and what people can expect to see there. Let's talk a bit about Sydney. Can you tell me about what the experience is like for a go-ahead traveler visiting Sydney?
Look, Sydney is the last stop in Australia on this itinerary, and it's that bucket list. Oh my God, I really made it. She sparkles. She's a show off. Sydney is situated on the world's largest natural harbour, and people are surprised by how big Sydney Harbour is. There's over 200 miles of coastline, and it's all just interwoven. And it is really beautiful. And this view is of Sydney from the water's edge. It's it's something that is such a prominent feature of the city, and it is Australia's largest city, but people are surprised by how clean it is and how much the water features. And you know, something that I always suggest is during your spare time to actually get onto the Sydney ferries, or we have our dinner cruise one of the nights available to us, and to actually take in Sydney Harbour on a night cruise, watching the sunset and then watching the city come to life. Is
Oh, that sounds lovely. I love the idea of seeing the city from the water.
Oh, the Opera House, the best vantage point is from the water. You can't get those shots from the ground.
Wonderful. Well,
Now,
this picture here looks like quite a spot to take a picture as well.
so a lot of our travelers will be very familiar with the term a Kodak moment, and this is the Kodak moment. This gets me so excited because people are having that pinch me, I'm really here. There's only 2 places in Sydney where you can actually get the bridge and the Opera House in the one shot, and this is Mrs. Macquarie's Point. So we love to take our group photo here, and really, I just think it's one of the most beautiful places, and it's such a short, you know, walk from our hotel, but it's always incorporated on our sightseeing tours as well. So one of my favorite gems of the city is to walk through the Queen Victoria building, and you know, often you're in the hum of walking down the main streets, but sometimes you don't zigzag through the actual buildings. And something that I love to do with my travelers is to, of an evening when all the stores are closed, go into Queen Victoria building. This clock is such a prominent feature. It's called the calendar clock, and you know, it's got all the different bays that Captain Cook on his maiden voyage along the east coast named along the way. We've got beautiful boutiques, Australian-made boutiques, some designer ones, and just the mosaic floors and the stained glass windows. It underwent a 20-year restoration in the late 80s, 1980s. So it's just such a gem of a find to walk through, and it's definitely one of my hidden gems that I love to share with people whilst they are in Sydney. Now, one of the features that's really different between Sydney and Melbourne is its proximity to the beaches. And, you know, it would not be complete for you to come to Sydney and not experience its most famous beach, which is Bondi. Bondi Beach is a short 20-minute drive from the heart of the city, and we incorporate it on our sightseeing tour. We love to give you an opportunity to go and wiggle your toes in the soft, powdery-like sand, maybe dip your toes in the Tasman Sea. And, you know, on any given weekend, there's up to about 30,000 people that flock to the most famous beach in Australia. We have our own version of Bondi Rescue, which is a take on Baywatch, but the real life of the lifeguards down at Bondi Beach. And, you know, there's some really beautiful coastal walks that are really accessible during people's free time. But Bondi is definitely one of those must-tick items when you are in Sydney.
Oh, I love it. I mean, these pictures, I'm in Massachusetts. We're getting freezing rain right now, and I would love to be there today.
Come for a swim. We've got so many places that you can choose from, and it's such a distinct feature of our largest city. So it's a beautiful stop.
Well, thank you so much, Sladana. We're going to come back to you in a little bit for another portion of the tour. But for now, we're going to venture into the Outback. And Luke is going to be talking us through this part of the tour. So, Luke, for many of our travelers, I imagine that Uluru is on their bucket list. And I was wondering if you could talk about the experience of going there with Go Ahead, but also if you could talk about Kata Tjuta, which is another formation that they might not be as familiar with, but should also be looking forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. No trip to Australia would be complete without getting to the Australian Outback. It's so well known, and it's right in the center of the country, a world away from Sydney and Melbourne as far as the landscape. And that what you're looking at right now is what people head out there to see. It is the world's largest monolith. The Aboriginal name, which is the name that we most commonly refer to it as, is called Uluru. but you may be familiar with Ayers Rock, which was the European name. Now, just to give you a few facts from this particular photo taken right now, which is actually an optional that we offer when we're out there. It's a 20-minute scenic plane ride. You head up and you do a few circles around the rock, get this view, but you don't really get an idea of just how big it is. So I'll just give you a few facts. From the ground level to the top, over 1,100 feet. To walk around the entire circumference, you're walking for about 6 miles. But when you look at it, it's like looking at an iceberg. It actually goes deep into the ground at the same circumference for over 2 miles. One big solid sandstone rock, making it the world's largest rock in the world. Now, while we're there, you're going to get many different angles of it. We give everyone the chance to get up close and touch it and walk around. And depending on your physical ability, you can walk a few miles, or you can just stroll, find a seat, relax and take in the enormity. But as you do walk around, you'll see Aboriginal artwork. You'll come across beautiful cave formations and water holes. And yeah, when you're actually there, it is surreal. It's a surreal feeling. The most famous thing to do at nighttime in the Outback is the sunset over Uluru. And that's because of the changing of the colors. This is myself with one of my past tour groups. Some people have some sparkling wine and orange juice, and we're there just enjoying the sunset. And as the sun gets lower to the horizon, the rock begins to glow this bright red color. And then as the sun drops below the horizon, it goes into a dark red. It's quite magical to see. Now, you did mention, Nelson, that there are other formations out there. This is the most famous, a lesser known one, which is actually only 25 miles to the west of Uluru, is called Kata Juta. Again, that's the Aboriginal name. The European name is the Olgas. And this is a conglomerate formation. So it's not a solid sandstone rock. It's lots of little rocks all joined together, making a bigger formation. And it's actually a lot bigger than Uluru. The circumference of Kata Juta is about 23 miles around, and it's also quite a bit higher, about 600 feet taller than Uluru, and just stunning and beautiful in its own way. There's a nice panoramic photo of it. We actually take you to that exact spot and get that beautiful photo of all the beautiful colors of the Outback. Magical place.
Oh, incredible. And I can just imagine standing there at sunset, the way you've painted a picture. It just sounds incredible.
It is.
Now, one thing that I wanted to ask you is there any other activity or things that you recommend that people do while they're in the Outback? Something that might not come to mind, but that you recommend to all your travelers?
Oh, absolutely. Many things. Well, the photo you're looking at there is a proud mum with her little Joey. Some of the native animals that we have in the Outback are phenomenal, found nowhere else in the world, not just the animals, but also these plants that can survive in the desert. And we, of course, tell you all about it, and quite amazing. But one hidden gem that I do have is always to encourage my groups to stay up late one night after dinner. We're in the Outback for 2 nights. So one night, stay up late, find a nice dark spot somewhere in the resort, and just simply look up at the desert sky in the evening. And the stars, I can't even begin to explain. The stars are phenomenal. The Milky Way is so clear, and you'll probably never see as many stars in your life. So that is a must.
I love it. I love it. And something like that sounds like something that you won't regret staying up late. Sure. All right. Well, thank you.
Many times. I've been there so many times, and I never miss the opportunity every single time.
Great. Well, thank you, Luke. And I am going to ask you to come back in just a moment. But for now, I'm going to check and see. Brad, do we have you here with us?
Yep, I'm here, mate.
Oh, Brad, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Before we begin talking about the Great Barrier Reef, I'd love to have you introduce yourself. And like we had the folks do before, if you could tell us how long you've been leading tours with Go Ahead as well.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's live, isn't it? And I was coming back from the pub after a beer, so I tried to get here as quick as I could. I've been with Go Ahead for around 12 to 15 years, I guess, and had the privilege of working with you guys. Fantastic company, the only company I've ever worked with, because of your professional approach to everything, and also the travellers. So all the travellers out there, love you guys. You make the trip just as much as we do, and we have such a great time down under here.
Great. Well, I'm sure that a lot of our travelers are anxious to hear about the Great Barrier Reef and this portion of the tour. I mean, the Great Barrier Reef, it's so important to Australia. It's so important to the world, but also to our travelers and their experience there. Could you give us a little bit of information about the reef itself, but then if you could also tell us about how our travelers will experience the reef on a Go Ahead tour?
Yeah, absolutely. Great Barrier Reef, everyone knows about it. Obviously, it's one of the 7 wonders of the natural world, and you only have to know that when you arrive and see it. But not only that, just the pure size of it. If you were to pull away from that from Earth, it is the only living organism that you can see from space. You can ask Elon Musk that. And then the size of it also is larger and longer than the Great Wall of China. And to give you a scope that you might understand with the US, it's about half the area of Texas in the US. So that gives you an idea of how large that is. The marine park stretches around 1,800 miles from the south of the Queensland, I guess runs parallel to Queensland, 1,800 miles. It starts at Bundaberg. Bundaberg is a place where we have a famous rum that we make out of the cane sugar up this way, which is where I am, up in the Coral Sea, and it runs all the way up to the tip of Cape York, to the very, very northern part of Australia. So it gives you an idea of the size of it. The reef from the mainland can start in the ocean from anywhere from, say, 9 miles out through to about 93 miles. And the width of the reef itself can go up to around 40 miles of any of those 3,000 different reef formations out there. So when you do head out there, looking at the coral gardens, that's what everyone loves to see. And we're seeing some of those on the screen now. We have incredible, impressive coral gardens. We have a really large part in being important in the ecosystem here, in the fact that we have over 1/3 of all the corals of the world here. So we have at least 400 different kinds of coral that you can see when you come out to the Great Barrier Reef. And not only that, you have over 1,500 species of fish. You've got tropical fish. You've got 200 types of birds that you might see. You've got coral sponges, mollusks. You've got dolphins, manta rays, giant clams, 120 years old. You name it. We've got what you call the Great Eight here. So you know how you've got it's the Big Five in Africa. You've got the Great Eight in here. One of those that come and breed up at the reef is the humpback whale. That comes all the way up from Antarctica. And so if you're around here between sort of that May and August period, you're going to see that activity at some stage along the coastline of Australia. But any time is magnificent because there's always something happening at that reef, whether it's the coral spawning, turtles, you name it. We've also got one of the most rarest and important dugong populations up there as well. So if you're lucky enough, you might see that. To give you an idea, the reef hovers below you, as you can see in front of us. The pontoon there is where we head out to. It can be only a metre below you, or it can extend on average about 35 metres down to the shell. Or if you go to the end of the continental shelf, that can drop down at least 1.5 mile. So it gives you this hot bed of marine life activity. On tour, where we went, where you had a look, we go out to that stable pontoon in the ocean. It's about an hour 45 on a very comfortable air-conditioned boat. And then you connect to that stationary pontoon, and this is where you do all the activities. So you can do things like the free activities you're seeing on the screen, which are like the glass bottom boat or the semi-submersible, or you can go snorkeling You can even go on a helicopter ride if you wanted to do it. So there's plenty of ways to see the reef, and you don't have to go in the water. You can see it from underneath. You can see it from on top with a helicopter, or you can do it just snorkeling like that. And that's how close you are in that screen when you have a look there. All the beautiful glass bottom boat, really comfortable along there. So to give you an idea also, apart from the aspects I've just spoken about of how important it is to the world in regards to its marine life and the corals, another important fact you might be interested in is the economic fact here in Australia. In Australia, this icon supports around 64,000 jobs in Australia and contributes around $6.4 billion to the Australian economy, which I find fascinating. And the asset itself, if you're interested in those things, they value that at $56 billion. So there you go. Come and get a piece of it. You'll be a millionaire.
Well, I mean, just these pictures alone are making me want to travel there. And I know that many of our travelers are very anxious to go and explore the reef. So thank you for telling us about the different ways that our travelers can experience that. Now, before we move on to the next portion of the tour, I did want to put a question to you that we had submitted to us by Kathy. And also remind you that if you do have questions for us that you'd like our panelists to answer, please put them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. But Kathy asked this question. She says, can you tell us a bit more about the many flights on this tour?
Yeah, absolutely, Nelson. Do you know what? The flights, this may sound a bit weird, are probably one of my favourite things. In Australia and New Zealand, it's almost like another optional because the landscapes that you see are so diverse. So when you leave Melbourne City and you fly out to the desert, it's just magnificent. I can't tell you enough how magnificent that is to watch that change. And then from when you fly from the desert and head to the tropical North Queensland, where I am up in the Coral Sea, that landscape change just blows your mind as well. And then even leaving and heading over to Sydney and flying over the Sydney Opera House and the bridge and flying into the city, and then over to New Zealand and over the Southern Alps, it honestly is breathtaking. And I reckon that's one of my favourite parts of the tour. We make it really simple here. We're quite lucky down under with our check-ins. The tour directors look after everything at this stage, unless things change, but we've always looked after the group, where we do a group check-in, and except for international flights, but domestically, we can group check-in, make it nice and easy. We load all the bags up. You don't have to worry, very stress-free, and you get to relax and enjoy the flight.
Well, thank you so much, Brad. I appreciate you telling us about that. And I can imagine all with the varying landscapes that we cover on this tour, that it would be pretty incredible to look out of an airplane window at them. Well, thank you so much, Brad. We are going to now move on to New Zealand, and specifically the Southern Island. And Luke, I'm going to ask you to hop in here to talk to us about the Southern Island. I mean, these landscapes here, they're world famous, incredible, as well as the animals that call this place home. And I've never been there, so I was wondering if you could just describe what it's like to visit Milford Sound.
Well, you'll have to get over here, Nelson, because it is simply breathtaking. We start our adventure through New Zealand on the South Island, and more specifically, we go into a little township called Te Aunau, which sits just on the outskirts of New Zealand's largest national park. It's called Fiordland National Park. And from there, we can do a day trip into Milford Sound. And this is right in the sound itself. That mountain you can see with the snow on the top, that is called Mitre Peak. And they say it's the most photographed mountain of New Zealand. It gets its name from the headpiece of a bishop, which is called a mitre. And the highlight of our day, once we get into Milford Sound, is the boat ride that we do. Almost 2 hours on the boat. We sail the entire length of Milford Sound, which is not actually a sound. It's a fjord, and that's because of how it was formed, and we explain all that to you throughout the day. But the scenery is phenomenal, from the many, many waterfalls to the glacial lakes, the mountain peaks, the crystal clear rivers. And we cruise all the way down the southern cliffside of Milford out into the Tasman Sea, and then we turn around and come back along the northern face. It is absolutely incredible. And the wildlife that you see throughout the day as well, from bottlenose dolphins to there's some New Zealand fur seals. They're actually juvenile male fur seals. And for about the first 3 years of their life, they spend the days sunbathing on these rocks that give them some heat. And then at nighttime, they go diving and look for different sea life. Mainly squid is what they feed on. Once they get a bit bigger, they leave the protection of the sound and go out into the open ocean. You also might come across some of the penguins that New Zealand have, and the birds. New Zealand is famous for the birds, of course, the kiwi, the weka, and there's a particular bird that you find in this part of the country, which is the only alpine parrot in the world, and it's called a kia. It's predominantly green in color, but once it starts flying, you can see in the photo there, once it starts flying and spreads its wings, the rainbow colors is phenomenal. So a day trip to Milford, it makes the South Island absolutely incredible.
Well, Luke, you've sold me. And you know, I'm a bit of an amateur birder, and I know that some folks that go on our tours are also interested in checking out birds. So that's one for your life list if you're a birder. The Kia bird, the only alpine parrot. This is just incredible. Now, there's one portion of the tour in the South Island of New Zealand that I did want to ask you about, which is we visit Glowworm Caves. Now, I've never been to a glowworm cave, and I don't know anything about them, but if you could just describe what that's like, and also, you know, I imagine some people might be hesitant to go into a cave, and if you could tell them what that portion of the tour would be like for them.
Yeah, a magical part of the tour, Nelson. So where we stay in Te Ao now, that village sits on the shoreline of the largest lake in the South Island of New Zealand called Lake Te Ao now. So we just walk down to the lakefront, we get on a boat, 30-minute boat trip across to the other side of the lake, and we enter into this magnificent cave. Now, just if the cave was there by itself, just walking in and seeing the natural limestone formations is absolutely beautiful. But then as an added bonus, the roof of the cave is filled with thousands of glowworms. Now, if you're not sure what a glowworm is, it's actually not a worm, it's a flying insect. And the adults, they fly into the cave and they lay their larvae on the rooftop of the cave. And for about 9 months, as this larvae is growing, they're wanting food. So they lower down about 30 silk threads into a web. And then through a chemical reaction, they're able to emit a light, which then attracts in the darkness this food source, whether it's bugs, different insects, and then they retract the webs and they're able to eat. And as you're walking through this cave, you look up and it is absolutely stunning. And then a great thing at the end of the cave is you get on this boat and the guides are great. And you just look up and it's like looking at the night sky. Beautiful.
Incredible. And I imagine that you have to really be there to see it. I can imagine pictures don't really do it justice.
Not with anything, whether you're in Milford Sound trying to take in the enormity of these Southern Alps or in a cave. Yeah, photos never do it justice. Get over here and check it out.
Well, Luke, before I move on to the next portion, I did want to ask you another question that we had submitted before the webinar. And again, if you do have questions, submit them to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. But this question is submitted by Linda, and she says, do you get a lot of Lord of the Rings fans on tour?
Yeah, well, Linda, we get so many. There's actually people that come to New Zealand simply for the Lord of the Rings movies. For those of you that aren't too familiar with it, Peter Jackson, the director, he's a New Zealander, and he chose his home country to film all of the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies. The agreement with the government, because a lot of the scenery was filmed inside national parks, like Fiordland National Park. A lot of scenes were filmed in Milford Sound. The agreement with the government was that after the filming, they had to remove everything, put it back to its natural state. So while we're in Milford Sound, you don't really know that a movie was ever filmed there. But there is one place on the North Island called Hobbiton. And this has now been turned into a movie set because it was constructed on a private farm. So they didn't have to take it down afterwards. and they offer a 2-hour fully guided walk through Hobbiton. And for Lord of the Rings fans, it is phenomenal. It's not far from Rotorua, so we can easily, during your free time, assist you in making a booking. Hobbiton have their own buses. They pick you up, take you out there and do the tour. So yeah, do that if you like the movies.
Great, wonderful. I imagine that there are some folks watching that were curious about that. Luke, actually, before I let you go, I have one more question for you, and this is actually about the Glowworm Caves. When you were talking, we got this submitted. When you were talking, you mentioned that they're there for 9 months. Are there only specific months of the year that they are glowing, or can you tell us about like the best time to visit the Glowworm Caves?
Yeah, any time of the year. They're laying the larvae continually all year round, because inside the cave, the temperature actually doesn't change too much. So whether it's summer or winter, outside the cave, it makes no difference to the actual breeding period of the glowworm. So any time of the year.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Luke. All right. So now, Sladana, I'm going to ask you to come back in and join us. And we are going to venture to the North Island of New Zealand and Rotorua. So far, as we've been talking about New Zealand, we've been focusing quite a bit on natural landscapes and animals and insects. But the North Island, a lot of the experiences that go-ahead travelers will have there will be cultural, especially as it relates to Maori culture. Sladana, could you tell us about what travelers can expect in Rotorua?
Yeah, absolutely. I love taking our groups to Rotorua. It is so incredibly different to the South Island. And I will say that it is, in essence, the heartbeat of New Zealand and Maori culture. So of the population in Rotorua, about a third of them are of Maori descent. And to witness the passion that these people have in wanting you to be exposed to their culture, it gets so deep into your heart and into your soul. It is such a wonderful experience. And we learn about, we will be welcomed at the village with a welcoming ceremony with some warriors. And we'll also be indulged to the beautiful sounds of the Maori music. So much of their history is told through their songs and oracally as well. So you'll notice the different carvings as we visit, and the warriors especially, how powerful they are. It's quite intimidating when you're getting welcomed into the village. But our time there is very rich. And Rotorua is another one of those words. Luke mentioned a few Maori words. So, Rotorua actually translates to mean the second lake, because there are quite a few lakes in that region within that city itself. But one of the highlights of our time there is experiencing some traditional Maori feasts. And one of those is the hangi. Now, for any of our travellers who may have been to Hawaii, you may have experienced the luau. This is an earth oven where they prepare all the food. They then put it down into the earth, and they use the steam to cook and prepare this delicious feast, which is called the hangi feast.
Wonderful. Well, I actually want to jump in here to ask you a quick follow-up question, because we, this is a famous dish from New Zealand, but we did get a question that we wanted to address, which was, what are some Australian dishes to sample on the tours? So if you could think back and take us back to Australia, and we could talk about some of the typical dishes that you'd need to sample in Australia.
Okay, so anyone that's travelled with me knows how much I love my peckish treats. Food is one of the best parts of travel, and there is a very heated debate between our two countries regarding one particular dessert, and that dessert is the Pavlova. The Aussies will say that it's ours and we'll claim it, and the Kiwis will do the same. But it's a little bit like angel food cake. So it's a meringue, and it's all about how you dress the topping of it, whether it's, with berries and kiwi fruit and passion fruit, named after a Russian ballerina. And when you come down under and you sample in both countries, you can decide who actually gets to claim the inventor title. Something else that you have to try is a meat pie. And, you know, a meat pie is that quintessential Aussie dish that we love to eat if we're at a sporting event or if we're on the run. And you quite simply just, you don't ever use a fork. It's always, you've got to pick it up. It's very messy. Sometimes it's, you know, flavors like steak and liver, or it might be steak and kidney or ground mince, but it's definitely one of our specialities. But my ultimate favorite, and this is the one that so many of our passengers sort of look at me when I make the suggestion, and it's called a Morton Bay Bug. And the Morton Bay Bugs is not a bug, it is a crustacean. It is a seafood delicacy. It looks like, I always say, liken it to the firmness of lobster tail, but the sweetness of crab meat. And it's certainly one of my favorite delicacies to enjoy.
Well, thank you so much for taking us on that food detour. This is always one of my favorite parts about talking about travel, is learning about different foods. Well, let's jump back to New Zealand, and there's a little bit more that we wanted to talk about, you know, the natural landscape of Rotorua. If you could tell us about that, please.
Yeah, so, you know, the South Island and the North Island couldn't be more contrasting. You've got the Alpine, the Southern Alps in the south, and on the North Island, we actually have 3 active volcanoes. So there's lots of green rolling hills dotted with all the sheep and all the, you know, dairy cows. But what's a real feature, and we get to see this in Rotorua, is the geothermal parks. And there's a really thin crust, Earth's crust. When we visit Te Whakariuriwa Thermal Village, we actually see these thermal pools where the Māori people sometimes even use to cook with and bathe with. And on occasion, we get a real special treat and witnessing the geysers. So a little similar perhaps to Yellowstone.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate that, Sladana. And we are going to continue on here, but I'm going to bring you back in a little bit to answer some Q&A. Now, at this point, yeah, absolutely. At this time, some folks will be returning home from tour, but you do have the option to add a few days in Fiji and delay your return home by a little bit. Brad, I'm going to bring you in here. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to visit Fiji and what our travelers can expect when they visit Fiji with Go Ahead?
Yeah, absolutely, Nelson. And I have to be honest here, I didn't know it was an option because most people do it. So I thought it was just part of the trip until I realized it wasn't. But there's a very good reason why I guess majority of all of the packs do go there, and our guests, is because it's after an Australia-New Zealand trip is just full of life. There's some great free time throughout there and so on. And it's one of your longer trips, I believe, that you do offer. And people love a little bit of a respite before they head home. So there's a couple of reasons. Fiji, the cultural side of it is fantastic. There's people enjoy resting by the beautiful pools at the resort, so it's more a resort-based stay. And then you can also, if you like, you can do some activities and experience the Fijian culture, which I encourage. And it's not too strenuous whatsoever. The people are beautiful. It's all about family in Fiji, and they're very warm, friendly, gentle people, and they want to make sure that you love them, love their country, and realize that you're part of their family. So you'll be welcome to what we see on the screen as a Carver Ceremony, and then you'll become part of the family. How you say hello there, you'll be saying Bulla for the men, a big, deep, guttural Bulla, and the women sing the Bulla more like a Bulla. So you'll be enjoying that. Once you've done the Carver Ceremony, basically you're welcomed into the family, into the village. That's one of the optionals where you will go into an actual authentic village, not a tourist village, but you go into other homes of people. That's quite remarkable. It's a half-day experience if you wanted to do it, and I recommend it highly because they're such heartful people, and they love singing as well. In the photo that you see here, there's also a boat ride out to a private island on one of the days if you wanted to do that. Very relaxed, very chilled. And about 1 in 4 Fijians play guitar, and all of them sing. So you get these magnificent symphonies of voice and song the whole way on your tours, wherever you are. Beautiful culture and a lovely way to unwind, relax, and fill your heart with joy before you head home.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you, Brad, for talking to us about that extension. We really appreciate it. And at this time, I'm going to bring back all 3 of our tour directors, so Brad, Sladana, and Luke, to ask some questions that we've had submitted. Sladana, I'm going to start with you. We have a question from Jennifer, and the question is, how do you pack for this trip?
Well, one thing, and Jennifer, thank you for asking this question. One thing that I will say that is so different from travel in the US is that we actually have our carry-on bags weighed, and our airlines are incredibly strict with that. So it's about 15 pounds of carry-on, and that's including, you know, your personal item and a little suitcase. And sometimes our passengers, when they arrive from the US, their carry-on is something that just won't fit on some of the smaller planes that we use. So first and foremost, you must make sure that your carry-on is within that 15-pound weight limit. The other thing that I love to tell our guests is that almost all of our hotels have washing facilities available. So there's washers and there's dryers. So you don't have to think that you've got nowhere to be able to, refresh your clothes. And for the majority of the year, other than that June, July period when it's winter, it is much milder than what you would be experiencing at home yourself. So pack light, leave room for your souvenirs. Okay, if there's anything you need, you can always buy it down under, make it a souvenir and something practical. And, you know, layers. I think layers is really easy because it's not big and bulky. So I always have a pair of pants, one skirt, pair of shorts, comfortable shoes, and the rest is just a few tops. And if I can get away of 20 days without having to do any washing on tour, then so should you guys. So just pack really, really light, and bear in mind how strict they are, the airlines here, particularly with the carry-on. So
great. Well, thanks for those tips. I mean, that's something that we're very good to know about beforehand.
Just to clarify, can I also just say, that's 15 pounds for the carry-on. For the checked luggage, it's about 50 pounds is what's allowed for the checked luggage. So you've still got your big suitcase that you can put everything in, but it's just sometimes our lovely ladies travel with much bigger handbags that weigh a lot more than those 15 pounds.
Wonderful. Well, pack light and layering, always good advice. All right, Luke, I'm going to bring this question to you. The question is about free days while on tour, and the question is from Kenneth. He says, are there optional side trips available?
Yes, well, we have a lot of optionals available, and that's one of the great things that I enjoy about the way that Go Ahead Tours construct their tours is we offer side trips to wineries or down to see penguins, whether you want to do a day trip up to a rainforest, many different optionals. And you don't have to do them, which is great. And that's what I like about it, because not everyone enjoys wine. So if you don't do that, why would you want to spend a day at a winery when we can give you ideas on other things to do? But just to mention the different optionals, one of my favorite, and I think a real must do, is in Cairns. Brad before talked about the Great Barrier Reef, which is, of course, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And Cairns is one of the few places in the world where there's another World Heritage Site which pretty much touches the reef, and that is the rainforest. And this is a full day excursion. Again, it's not compulsory if you don't want to do it. If it doesn't interest you, we can give you tips on other things to do. But if you do it, you'll simply be amazed by this rainforest. You're going to get the perspective from many different views. We start by doing a 2-hour train ride starting at sea level. And for 2 hours, we make our way up a range and over 1,000 feet by the time you get off, passing waterfalls and going through tunnels and bridges. So that's the view of the rainforest from the train. You'll also get to ride the Sky Rail, which is a 5-mile gondola ride that goes over the canopy. So you're flying over the treetops. You're about anywhere from 100 to 200 feet in the air on top of the trees, getting the bird's eye view. And then, of course, throughout the day, there's different boardwalks that you can do and simply just walk through the rainforest and see it from the ground as well. So that's a magnificent day and a real added experience to your time in the tropics.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And honestly, just a reminder that, as much as we've been able to cover in this session, there is so much more to the tour Australia, New Zealand, but also all of our tours in the South Pacific. And I'd encourage folks that are here and curious to go on the website and look through some of these optional excursions and different things that are included, because we haven't been able to touch on them all. We've just been talking about some of the highlights today. Brad, I have a question that we've gotten a number of questions like this. So I'm going to combine questions that we got from Margaret and Karen and ask you, what is the best time of year to visit Australia and New Zealand?
Very easy, anytime. No, quite seriously, I say that because it depends what you want to experience, I guess. Our summer period is different. Obviously, our summer runs from December through to February. Then we have autumn or fall from March through to June. Then we have winter from June through to end of August. And then our spring is September through to the end of November. So our climate's quite mild comparatively. We don't have huge amounts of snow. We have snow in our Alps, but in our cities and the places we go, you don't have snow. So you're even in winter, which our winter from June to July, you guys would call quite mild. You can get days that are around, generally in our most southern parts, which are the coldest parts, we'll probably, get to maybe 65 or 70 during a day. So it's not too cold. In regards to, we touched on a few things. People are obviously do things happen all the way through the year. Glowworms, we touched on, they happen throughout the whole entire year, so that you're never going to miss that experience. If you were keen to see the whales migrate, maybe you might want to look at coming between June and July or May through to August, I guess, because that's when they're traveling from the southern coast all the way up. Other than that, there's not a huge, apart from the flowering in the tropics in spring, also in April, up in the tropic areas, after the wet season, you might want to see flowers in that period. Maybe that's something you would consider. However, or sporting, if you're interested in sports and you wanted to see an AFL game, or if you wanted to see the Australian Open tennis, maybe you want to plan for January. If you were looking at tennis and wanted to catch a game in Melbourne when you arrive, or if you wanted to see the Australian football, which is a great game, look up the AFL, all our listeners, Australian Football League, and follow the Fremantle Dockers. That's who you want to follow. And you might want to see a game there because that's a spectacle itself. And in summer also, you might want to watch a game of cricket. We have cricket, which is a game that's specific to the Commonwealth countries that you may be interested in that you guys wouldn't see either. But anytime, to be honest, we're not restricted in views or anything on any of that component of the tour.
I love it. So whenever you have time to travel, come on down. Wonderful. I'm going to move on to another question that we got from Susan, and I'm gonna ask this of Sladana. Can you add a pre-tour stay in Melbourne or a post-tour stay in New Zealand?
Absolutely. That's really easy. And it's sometimes quite a popular thing for some of our guests to do. It is a long flight to get to Australia, and so sometimes people like to, as Brad said, if it's this time of year, you might want to come and get a few games at the tennis, and you might want to come a few days just to assimilate. It really, look, the pace of the tour It does allow for you to come to Melbourne earlier if there's other parts of the country that we're not covering on the itinerary that you might want to see. And New Zealand is also a beautiful stop to extend a little bit more time in Auckland. So on either of those ends, I believe you could, even if you were doing the extension to Fiji and you wanted more time to experience the Pacific Islands there, you could extend your time there too. So very easy, yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Luke, I'm going to give this question to you. Do we offer any trips or itineraries that include Kangaroo Island?
Yes, we do. And I was really excited for us to begin that last year before, of course, the world got turned on its head with this pandemic. But once we do start up again, we are very excited to start a new itinerary. So we haven't done it as yet, but it's an itinerary that's going to take in Australia. So we're going to do Sydney, we're going to head up to Cairns, but we're going to go a little bit further up to Port Douglas. And then we're going to go to Adelaide, which I'm really excited to take groups to, because that's where I was actually born, in this beautiful city, the capital of South Australia. We're going to be there for a few nights. And as part of that, do a trip out to Kangaroo Island. And we're going to stay overnight there. The guides there are phenomenal. A lot of them are actually colleagues or tour guides that I'm familiar with within the country. They are very passionate about their island, and the wildlife out there and the coastline is phenomenal. So yes, Kangaroo Island, cannot wait.
Great. And if you're curious about that itinerary, if you go on our website and just type Kangaroo Island into the search bar, it'll bring it right up for you. All right, we got one question. What is my cat's name? My cat's name is Chewbacca. He's a Star Wars cat. He's my co-pilot here. All right, we're going to move on to one more question here before we wrap it up, and I'm going to send this one to Brad. Brad, this question is from Sharon. She says, so much to see in two large countries. Is it better to do them separately or together?
Yeah, look, I think the best way, this is me personally, I mean, I've had people who come and have done Australia by itself, and then they've come back and done New Zealand. So, and I've taken the same people on the tours. I'll tell you what, the overall Australia-New Zealand trip gives you an incredible insight into Australia and New Zealand, and you see and do a majority of everything that you would do if you just did the Australian side or the New Zealand side. I think if you're coming down under, that to do the Australia-New Zealand Fiji component is really the way to go. That's just a personal thing from my experience. However, I know that there's been some really keen people who have just said, you know what, I just want to do Australia, and then I'll come back a couple of years later and then I'll do New Zealand. There is some slight differences in New Zealand on just the New Zealand component. You do a more extensive bus travel up the South Island, which goes for quite a few days. And so you're traveling by bus all the way up New Zealand in some pretty sensational spots. So that's a main difference of the New Zealand component. But if you came to do the Australia and New Zealand together, you would not be disappointed, and you would feel that you saw the best of Australia and the best of New Zealand, and also Fiji, without a doubt.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. And I think that, again, I'd encourage people, if you're curious about these different itineraries, take a look on our website or give us a call. We're always happy to talk through different options with you. Before we finish, I do just want to say thank you again to Brad, Luke, and Sladana. We really appreciate having you here. And I know that our travelers that have joined us are very appreciative of you and hearing your expertise. We do want to tell you about some upcoming events. We have heard you, and we are going to be adding even more destinations to our Tuesday Travel Talk series. So keep an eye on our website at goaheadtours.com/webinars. We will be updating that very soon with some new destinations. But today we can tell you about our destination spotlight of St. Patrick's Day in Ireland. This will be on Tuesday, March 16th, and we are going to be bringing St. Patrick's Day from Ireland to your home. So wear your green, join us, and tune in to hear about St. Patrick's Day and those wonderful traditions. So again, that is Tuesday, March 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We want to thank you again for joining us today for this installment of the Tuesday Travel Talk series. If you do have more questions, you can always give us a call at 877-402-4072. And of course, you can always browse our website at goaheadtours.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and happy travels.